We had a workshop, I want to say like maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, in about 13 different participants from across the UK. And we taught them how to do low-cost digitization. And essentially what we mean by that is that we allowed everyone with just their cell phone and a computer to make 3D models, 3D digital models of like real life historical artifacts using just 360 video and then free software called Mushroom and Blender. And we have a presentation actually that we're going to show you that sort of goes more into the workshop, so you can basically pick up where we left off.
Hi, I'll just quickly introduce myself as well. I'm Adil Mian, and me and Jindai collaborated on this for the past few months. We're both students at Cambridge, and yeah, this project came about as a need to increase accessibility for people like us from global majority regions who don't have the privilege and sometimes resources to have access to elitist technologies or elitist kind of connections. So we'll begin just by kind of introducing the workshop that we planned in advance previously, and then we'll go into the products of that and what we're going to do continuing forwards as we try to build a community around accessibility in 3D space.
Okay, so basically just some brief acknowledgements, but Cambridge Digital Humanities is what made like this workshop possible. And also we have to give big thanks to Malik Al-Nasir, and we'll go more into him, but he is in charge of the Sandbach Tinne Archive. And also we have people today from the Anti-Colonial Archives Working Group that we're really excited for you to meet. So basically, as we were talking about, we had a workshop with people from across the UK. And the purpose of the workshop, as Adil was saying, is that we really wanted to increase accessibility within the cultural heritage and preservation spaces. And we thought that would be best done through digitization technology. So essentially, what we hoped that everyone walked away from the workshop doing is that we hope that basically with just your cell phone, as long as your cell phone has a camera and your computer, that you were able to take a real life historical artifact, and we'll go more into where those artifacts were from in a bit, and take a 360 video, export that to Mushroom and Blender, and make a real life digital model that's 3-dimensional and navigated in 3-dimensional space. So basically where the artifacts were from is called the Sandbach Tinne Dynasty. So something that I really want to point out is that, and unfortunately he couldn't make it today, but there's this PhD history researcher, and his name is Malik Al-Nasir. He is currently based in the Faculty of History at Cambridge University. And this is basically his project, the Sandbach Tinne Archive. He essentially traced back his ancestry to the colonialism and slavery period, and he was able to trace it back to the Sandbach Tinne Dynasty. And the Sandbach Tinne Dynasty is this dynasty that has multiple links to legacies of enslavement and colonialism within the Caribbean. They were based in British Guyana mainly, but essentially they were like shipping. So they had a lot to do with like the shipping back and forth of plantations, supplies, and all of these things between the UK or the metropole and the Caribbean. And every single historical artifact that we provided of use was essentially from this archive that Malik so kindly let us borrow.
As we're going through, I have the access to some of the materials we use in the workshop. These are from Malik's personal archives. So as we're going through and as Jindai is explaining some of them, I'll just highlight some of these quickly. For example, yes. This is an antique coin from Guyana, which is I think 10 cents. And there's 4 or 5 objects that we use in the workshop itself that were lent to us by Malik that relate to his personal histories.
Yeah. And all of them are basically all connected to the bank. So yeah, you can see like there's that plate of William Gladstone, who's also like a huge person that has huge connections to the slave trade. And there's also like, what else is there? There's like a coin bank. Yeah, there's like a coin bank. But all of them are related to money because all of them are from the Bank of Liverpool / St. Martin's Bank. And as you can guess, those banks and financial institutions were started obviously with very significant money from the slave trade provided by the Sandbach Tinne dynasty. So that's sort of like the relation. And then also what you're seeing here in terms of personal history. So Malik al-Nasir is related to the Sandbach Tinne dynasty through actually his white side of the family. So his story is, I think, more like unique and unusual. And he also participated in a documentary in relation to one of his ancestors, Andrew Watson, who was one of the first Black footballers in Britain.
So I'll just quickly explain why photogrammetry and why digitization specifically are, I think personally, skills that we all should know so that we can preserve our cultural histories. And this is an example of a network of mines in California called Cerro Gordo mines. And in the 1800s, these mines were used by residents to thrive in their local kind of economy. So they could mine zinc and silver specifically. And through crackdowns of labor rights and mining rights, after there was a period of exodus, and you can see that as the town is being emptied, where people are now evacuating because there's no fiscal support for them to thrive in their community anymore. But just 3 years ago, this mining network and town was entirely digitized, using technology that essentially we used in the same technology that we used in our workshop, but they had access to drones and they had access to a few more specialist cameras, but it's very similar. And this kind of inspired me to look into my own histories and how I can preserve my own histories. And there's a lot of power in these technologies. So photogrammetry is that process of, and I like that it's defined as the art and science of extracting 3D information from photographs. And we have come far enough that we can do this with the technologies we have available every day. So going forward, we have these 2 videos from our workshop that Jindai will explain what they kind of are trying to do here.
Yeah, so the first one is basically what we're talking about. So they took a 360 video using their cell phone, and we also had like a lazy Susan for like easy rotation. But that's all they're doing, is that they're making sure that they have like both close up and far away angles of the object within like a 360 space. And then this is sort of like a close-up, so you can sort of see like their view through the phone itself. But this is a sort of essentially like the beginning processes of like the scanning that we would then take to Mushroom and Blender.
So one thing that we wanted to kind of push through as we did this workshop and as we continue to build on this ethos is accessibility. And that comes not only in the materials we use, but in the kind of theoretical framework we embody as we engage with each other, and engage in community and engage with personal archivists or university affiliated archivists or private archivists. The question is, how do we really interpersonally link with each other in our archiving and digitization practices, and how do we produce knowledge? So there are these 2 ways of being that we've been looking at. One is arborescent, which is what we're used to in capitalist societies, is that there is some policy, some invisible governance committee makes that then bleeds down to people like us, who then have to succumb to those kind of violences. Whereas what we're trying to push more so is what we call rhizomatic governance. And this came about through Black feminist groups in America, where the form of governance is to actually allow everyone to have an equal and timely say in what is happening, and also to allow for accessibility in our very neurodivergent, very diverse ways of intersectional beings. So the project could look like having multiple entry points rather than just one entry point of like an employment, for example. And there is an open system of open access knowledge as well. And so these kind of ideas have led into what the kind of programs we're allowing people to use. And so in Blender, the idea is that I'm just seeing where the video goes. This is Blender, and here it's a completely free software which is built upon that ethos of allowing people to build their skills, whether it's 3D digitization or any other kind of skill set, through free access. So that's why it's important that we go through very specific ways of operating 3D digital objects, because there's many kind of softwares that are very expensive, and they might be better, but what are we losing when we buy into that price point? So in Blender, the idea was to view the object, but to view the object, we had to first create these images that we take into Meshroom, and Meshroom then immediately creates a 3D object from the images itself. So it's a very minimal process, and it's you don't have to be an expert or a specialist to understand this process. We will share all the resources in the tutorials after this talk, and everybody will have hopefully access to how to actually engage with these two programs. But essentially the process was a 3-step process where we take a video through which we create images, and we put those images into Meshroom. Meshroom then creates a 3D mesh, and I will show you what the 3D mesh in the end looks like. So this is the plate you're seeing here. And you can see that the reconstruction of this plate in Blender is very well done. Like, for a completely free workflow, it's preserved so many details that even I was surprised at. Like, you can read the writing completely. And this would meet, I think, kind of minimal standards for digitization. Malcolm Gladwell is looking good. he's shining, and this is the kind of quality you can expect through, if you want to archive your own histories. So I would not say that we're at this point in society now, in technological society, that free doesn't mean low quality necessarily. And so you can see in Meshroom, this is what is generated from the images. It's a point cloud. And it's a point cloud, meaning that it analyzes all the different camera angles that were used in the pictures, and then it generates a mesh from those pictures. And unfortunately, Meshroom is not available on OS, but there's another program called PhotoCatch, which is free, and that's also available on Mac OS. And Mac programs are much better at photogrammetry than actually Windows. So we had some participants who were using PhotoCatch, and they digitized their objects in like 5 minutes, whereas Meshroom takes about 30.
So good too. It was so detailed. I was like, oh my gosh.
It's very good. So one thing that PhotoCatch does is that it reduces all the background noises as well, so the image comes out much clearer. So yeah, there's free, if you have a Mac OS or if you have Windows, you don't have to worry, you have options available to you. One thing that I would like to kind of highlight is this idea of critical fabulation that Jendai introduced me to. It's an idea that Saidiya Hartman came up with. Would you like to say a few words about this, Jendai?
So I mean, we love Saidiya. So Saidiya Hartman, she's at Yale right now, but basically she is, I want to say, like a Black feminist theorist and historian. And she kind of came up with the concept of critical fabulation. She applied this specifically to the transatlantic slave trade because she found, as a Black woman who was trying to basically trace the more micro histories of enslaved women in the transatlantic slave trade, that it was hard, right? Because when you go into the archives, it's usually written from like the colonizer, the perpetrator of violence perspective. And so you miss out on like a lot of details of what life was like, for example, for enslaved people. And so basically she sort of comes up with this methodology that combines history, so like, the actual historical facts that you can extract from the archive, but also sort of like literary devices and fiction, basically to sort of dehumanize subjects, and also allow for sort of like a new form of history to take place that, accounts for some of the violence and some of the gaps that you will encounter when studying histories like the enslaved people of the transatlantic slave trade, for example.
And to highlight this idea of critical fabulation, which allows us to kind of digitize or imagine digitizing imagined histories and imagined objects, which might counteract colonial histories. I'll quickly go through this in 1 minute. This is a period in history, in South Asian history, which is so interesting. In 1857, the Indian civilians and Indian kind of organization revolted against the British Empire, specifically the British East India Company. And there's many reasons, but one of the reasons was that the Indian soldiers, the sepoys, were being given these bullets, which were apparently greased with cow and pig fat, which was not only offensive to Hindus, but also to Muslims. So this was a kind of final, straw on the camel's back, which essentially led to this mutiny. And I did a project with Oxford Museum where I looked at this specific period in history where there's so much mass hysteria of the British psyche that relates to what led to the revolt. And so over here, you see, I made this map which documents a travel period of home-cooked chapatis, like naans. I'm sure we've all had a chapati or a naan at some point. The idea was that these chowkidars, the kind of watchers, caretakers, were delivering these chapatis all over India in like a day, covering 300 miles. And so the British psyche, the British imperial psyche, became incredibly afraid and did not understand the message. They thought it was like a spy network. And to kind of correlate my own history of this, I made this bullet, which is the Enfield bullet, the bullet that was being greased with fat and cows and pigs fat, and juxtaposed it with the image of the Indian sepoys who revolted, And this is a very mythologized period in history. Like, there's a lot of contested accounts. People say that didn't even happen. But for me, the idea of South Asian anger and South Asian revolt is so important that this idea of critical fabulation and digitization becomes intrinsically linked into my own histories. So that's one way we can think of our own histories as we go forward, is how can we reimagine the colonial truth and invent and imagine objects, There's some more examples that we can share later.
Yes, and so then we also, something to keep in mind too is that it's not just, of course, about the digitization of these objects, but we want for people to be equipped to upload these and have them archived properly, not only for like their own records, but again, so that people who are not physically based in these places can find different ways to access this information as well. And so we had a lot of help from the digital libraries of the Caribbean. I encourage everyone to check them out. They have been so helpful throughout this entire process. But essentially, we went to a metadata training of theirs, and they actually have their own open access metadata template that they allow people to use. And it basically meets sort of the minimum standards for what is required to digitize something. And basically, I combined that with a similar template from the Smithsonian. And so the Smithsonian has a 3D digital repository, and they also have their own minimum standards for what is required to, archive something basically that is like a 3D object in digital space. So we combined both of these, and we made sort of like a minimum requirement template for, 3D objects. And it was really great because I think that, it's important to make sure that everyone feels like they're also on, I think, an intellectual level field as other historians that may have more institutional backing. And again, too, because this is about accessibility, the whole point of being able to, upload such important artifacts that are related to legacies of enslavement and colonialism is for, someone like me right now who's based at Cambridge University can scan something from British Guyana, and then somebody actually from Guyana can access that and access all of the relevant historical information, which would be stored in the metadata.
I think that's kind of the end of our presentation. And we just wanted to say that we have some projects going on forward, like building a 3D digital museum that we want all the previous participants and any further participants who might be interested in contributing their personal items to, as a show of, this process of rhizomatic collaboration. And we'll give you a lot more details about this, but just to highlight it here. And we will now hand over to Sarah, who was a participant, and they will share their experience and their kind of history with digitization.
Thank you so much for passing it on to me. And also thank you so much for your great presentation. It was so good to sort of go back and see what we actually looked at during the workshop as well. And I sort of also want to bring in my own experiences and my own sort of opinions about the workshop as well, which was great. In an era specifically which also tackles sort of post-truth and the spread of misinformation, we are witnessing so much erasure of cultural knowledge. And we therefore, through GATE initiatives such as this workshop, must explore ways in which such erasures can be prevented and resisted. The possibilities of engaging with such digital tools and methods, especially that of photogrammetry, I believe, carves an infrastructure of knowledge, allowing for growth in accessible ways. Moving to my own work and sort of experiences and encounters when attempting to research through archival methods, I have found that digital platforms have carved a route beyond closed doors. They have adversely allowed for access beyond a pandemic-stricken time, beyond barriers of alienation, othering, and other forms of isolation. The carving of a route beyond closed doors coincided with my transition of turning toward the reconstruction and imagining of what the closed and inaccessible archive embodied through my own memories of it, as well as experiences with it. Through software such as Blender, Unreal Engine, and Data Wrapper, I was able to construct a spatial CGI reconstruction of the spaces which I was attempting to encounter and research in, thus allowing for new possibilities of knowledge to be produced and encountered. Through the digitization workshop, here you can see the bank coin, which Adil was mentioning as well. We explored free and accessible digital workflows of knowledge when archiving material. Through simple tools that are driven by open source ethos, we were able to familiarize ourselves with available technologies that allow for capturing physical objects and transforming them into digital objects, essentially FBX files as the final sort of product, but then available to be published on other sort of platforms such as Sketchfab. The digital workflows and familiarity with web accessible archives additionally are not only open access to information, rather such technologies reduce the wear and tear on archival objects. More contributors can be part of the archival projects, materials will not be lost to time, and wider audiences can begin to interact with the materials available without traveling to a room with a closed door. Finally, sort of the digitization workshop definitely demonstrated professional templates, but this is also a sort of what my final product looked like for the photogrammetry and its sort of outcome when I actually published it to Sketchfab. So I thought I'd show you a little video of it as well. But this is specifically what Jandaya was mentioning regarding the content for metadata creation. And I think this is also a vital piece of information that we learned throughout the workshop, which demonstrated sort of professional templates for addressing metadata and content of digitized, archival objects prior to publishing on platforms such as Sketchfab. I personally find this to be a vital part of producing open source data in an age of post-truth. Content and sort of its verification of the data produced is an increasingly urgent skill and practice in reducing misinformation. So it's great to, from the beginning, learn how to sort of publish your information and reduce misinformation in any way. And finally, through the skills and practices from the digital workshop, I will aim to explore physical archival information and architectural infrastructures via photogrammetry to open spaces otherwise inaccessible via publishing my FBX files, which I will do through sort of Blender and sort of photogrammetry as well, and then onto self-created WebXR platforms for an open, accessible space where discourse and knowledge can be exchanged, as well as allow for preservation and interaction of cultural knowledge through digital tools. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm so happy to sort of be joined in this conversation and looking forward to sort of engaging with you at the roundtable and open discussion forum.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Seeing your work is such a testament to what you have been talking about since we met, and that is imagine realities through, you know, a lot of personal kind of struggle. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. So we should now open up the discussion for 10 minutes to take in questions, take in queries, and just if you want to share your experience in digitization and archiving from where you are from, please just chime in, unmute yourself, or type in the chat as you feel free.